Hello, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our three-part November webinar series, Your Roadmap to Resilience. We're super excited to kick off part one today. Today's topic is bouncing back from the upheaval of COVID-19. So to start off, my name is Julie Ludwig. I'm the Marketing Communications Specialist here at Church and Casualty. For those of you who don't already know us, we specialize in property and casualty insurance for houses of worship and nonprofits, and we're proud to be the largest insurer of houses of worship in the southwestern United States. So today I am joined by Kathleen Doyle, who will be our presenter today. Kathleen is an organizational management consultant and pastoral counselor who integrates psychological theory, management training, and biblical principles to assist organizations in building healthy teams and a more productive environment. She has a master's degree in pastoral counseling with over 25 years experience in organizational management and hiring. She has been on staff with several churches, including Saddleback Church in Rock Harbor in Southern California, and has done assessment, staffing, and management consulting for Transparent Productions, King Studios, British Aerospace Engineers, and Trinity Law School. Her practice is based in Los Angeles, California. So Kathleen will present for about 45 minutes, and then we will do a 10 to 15-minute Q&A at the end. We might stop in the middle of the presentation to address some questions that have come in, but for the most part, the Q&A will be at the end portion of the presentation. So be sure to submit your questions in the Q&A box below. You'll see it at the bottom of your screen. And just a quick reminder before we begin, this webinar will be recorded. It'll be available to all registered attendees. So please keep an eye on your inbox for that in the next couple days. Whatever email you use to register is the email we send it to. And also we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel, and it'll be available on our website. So a couple different places that you can access the material if you want to rewatch it, share with someone you know, share with your community. So yeah, a couple different places. So let's get started. I will go ahead and turn it over to Kathleen.
As I talked to Julie and Travis, one of their concerns was just the well-being of this community that they serve and that they love, and how are you guys doing? So we're going to sort of address this from, what do you do to rebuild after a year and a half, like what we've been through? What do you do to rebuild yourself, rebuild your community, rebuild your church? And as Julie said earlier, I've worked in churches for a long time. I actually had worked for a church right up until January 2020, and then I rebooted my private practice. So I just missed what most of you went through, but I was on the sidelines. I was in contact with a lot of people working at churches, and I know it's just been rough. I know that you had to go through your own story of a pandemic and a weird political season. Then you had a whole congregation that had a lot of needs, and that it's just a big load to carry. And the work that you do in your nonprofit work and in your church work is so important to the community. So when you have a huge weight on your own shoulders, and then you've got a whole community looking to you for guidance and for help, you're in a tough spot. So we want to look at this point going, we've got a little breathing room now. Some of this is lightening up, but there's still lingering effects to everything that we just went through. In fact, the Wall Street Journal just put out an article, I think yesterday or today, saying that 32% of Americans indicated that during the course of the pandemic, they were so stressed that they were having hard times making basic decisions like what to wear and what to eat. So the flooding that we've just gone through emotionally, socially, spiritually is still, I mean, there's going to be a hangover effect from all of that. So one of the first things that we want to ask in this scenario, if we go to the next slide, is just first things first, how are you? And how heavy has this load been for you? I don't know how else to say this, like you are the tool, but I mean that as a compliment. You're the tool in ministry. Who you are, what's going on inside your soul, how you're doing as a human being is so essential to the work. You know, everybody brings themselves to work. And so you can't separate the two, but depending on your task and depending on your work, your personal life can sort of be out of sorts, or your soul can be a little out of sorts. And sometimes you can still really get your work done. Not easy to do in ministry. So something that you may need to take a look at in this season is just, how are you? How heavy was this load on your shoulders? Have you rebounded? Sometimes the team that shows up to offer help at the beginning is the team that has the delayed response to what just happened. You were in it, you were engaged, you were solving the problems, and now kind of the rebound effect of, wow, I went through that too. That was a lot. I felt afraid, I felt attacked, I felt my well-being, my livelihood, my church, my environment was threatened in some ways. And if you haven't really addressed that yet, recovered from that, bounced back from that, you personally may need a season of kind of being rebuilt, of being refreshed, and of attending to whatever this did inside of you. So you may need a break. You may need to consider getting some counsel or some help, some resources around you to help you process what you just went through. So I want to start there. Just to say, the next part of what we're going to be talking about are how do you assess your organizational health and morale? How do you clarify the needs? How do you examine how to go forward and develop a plan going forward? But if you're not okay, the load of rebuilding will be too heavy at this point. So first things first, check in with yourself. If you need some care, it might be time to carve out time in your life to make sure that that happens first. But assuming maybe that's happened, or that it's time to move forward, what we want to do is talk about rebuilding. And the first thing that you need to do before you rebuild is assess the situation. So if we can go to the next slide. It's really such a unique time in history. Like, nobody's got a manual on how do you recover from a pandemic and a political year like what we just went through. Nobody's got this thing figured out. Everybody's kind of hunting around to try to figure out the strategies to heal, recover, rebuild the communities that we've invested in. Some of us dealing with the losses. We built something and put a lot of heart into it, put a lot of effort into it, and it feels like part of it just was set on fire, and now we've got to figure out how to deal with the losses and deal with what's left over. And so one of the important things in this next season is to carve out time to give yourself a moment to assess the damage, assess the scenario that you're in, take a look at the inventory in the closet, and figure out where you really landed. What might be helpful too is to really assess what are our values? Who are we about? And even though we've lived this out, we come to church or we come to temple every weekend, we're here doing our thing. We know our routine. We know how to engage this. This may be an important time to step back and go, let me really do big picture. Why do we do what we do? And how do we know if we're succeeding at what we do? And one of the ways that you want to do that is to make sure that you really engage with what is going on with your congregation. If we do an assessment and we've not really engaged at all with what's happening in the congregation, we haven't asked the person who comes to the Sunday service or the event or whatever, we're missing a huge piece of information. So when we do this assessment time, we not only want to look at what do I value, what do I think this organization or department should be about, it becomes really important to say, what's my audience, for lack of a better word? What do they believe this is a part of? What are they looking for when they engage? And how do we make sure that what I want to bring and what they're asking for is matching up? So it's going to be important to do a season of assessment. And the more specific you can get in terms of drawing out of your congregation and getting very clear about what it is you want to accomplish, the more targeted you can be, the more strategic you can be, and the more that greater opportunity to feel that you've accomplished some wins. And I think this is a season where getting a few wins under your belt, feeling like, man, this was one of our values. We really got clear about what that is, and we've moved in a direction to begin to really accomplish the purposes of that value. getting a few wins is going to help with morale, which we're going to talk about in a bit, because morale in general in the world, I think, is a bit low right now. So we got to work on building that up. But something we have to acknowledge when it comes to assessment, whether it's your department, whether it's the whole church, I've worked at churches long enough and I've done this for long enough. It's hard to open up assessment to sometimes the congregation or the participants in your community. And I just want to acknowledge that. Opening that door up as can create some stress for the leader. What can happen is if the lines of communication between leadership and a congregation have not been open for a while, once you open the door to ask a question, hey, how's Sunday service going, or whatever it might be, sometimes what you do is you invite a flood of people with a lot of different agendas coming at you with a lot of opinions, a lot of criticism, a lot of agendas, and it's just overwhelming. The question you came at them with isn't even answered, and now you've opened up the door, a Pandora's box of people to let you know how you could do your job 10 different ways and why you should engage in this brand new, initiative or ministry and all this other stuff. So I've been there and I've done this long enough to understand that there can be resistance and actual fear around opening up this door. The mature members of your congregation will offer feedback and insight that's really helpful, but those that may be less mature can add a tremendous amount of stress to your load. So what can happen is the temptation is I'm not prepped for the stress. I'm not prepped for some of the drama that can come from opening this door up. So I'm just going to keep it closed. And I'm just going to hope that I can answer these questions and come up with a meaningful ministry plan or a meaningful path forward. And I'm going to do it a bit in the dark. And I just want to challenge you a bit to find healthy ways to engage in getting feedback. Find kind of paths that don't fling the doors open and leave you totally vulnerable to all kinds of crazy opinions, but find paths where you're actually getting really constructive, healthy feedback about the current condition of your congregation, because you may be pleasantly surprised by what you hear and you may be shocked by the things that they actually need. I remember when the pandemic first hit, and again, I had just reopened my practice. If you remember back at the time, we were at a place, I don't know if you remember this. I don't know if your community did it. I'm in LA. We could not have been more locked down and we could not have been on more high alert. But I was doing it too, just to be honest. But, we were having all our groceries brought in and then you were wiping them down with wipes just to make sure that there was no COVID on it. Because at that point, we didn't really know how it spread. It sounded horrendous. We were watching the news. It looked like the fallout was going to be horrific. And so it was very tense, panicky time, and it was high alert. So based on that, if you'd asked me, what do I think a church needs? Prayer, safety, etc., conversations about health. What I learned from my private practice is really what a church needed at that moment. I would have never intuitively thought of, but they needed to run marriage courses. Because the number of people who called me up at that point to say our marriage is almost over. We are all locked in this house together. My kids have all been brought home. They've lost all their friends. I don't know how to cope with this. And this marriage that was already fraying at the ends I can't do it anymore. So I'd contacted several friends at churches, and I just said, hey, if you're looking for an outreach right now, pop in a video and do a marriage course and you will be flooded. And one church I know did it, and the sign up was unbelievable. That's not an intuitive thing in the middle of a pandemic, is to think of doing a marriage course. But that was one of the felt needs. And that was the deep concern that people were facing. And it was a moment for the church to show up and say, hey, I can see what's happening in your life. And we've got some things to offer with that kind of pain and stress. So we've got a new moment. We've got a new moment in the church where people have new experiences and opinions about the value of their spiritual community, the value of their faith. And it may be really important to get in there and ask them, after this year and a half, what do you need? After this year and a half, what's your view of the church? Because the other thing that I did experience at moments were people dropping out of church saying, I don't know what the practical value of this is to us right now. And so I don't know if we'll go back. We need to hear that stuff. It may not be pleasant to hear, but sometimes we need to get in touch with those concerns so that we can begin to address them and find out, hey, what can we offer? How do we engage people again in a spiritual community? Not just have them home online, not just having them podcast, every possible preacher and every possible teaching that they can get, but actually wanting to show up. And so going back to assessment, it's going to be really important to find some ways to connect with your congregation to find out what after this year do you need. So I just encourage you to consider things like a short and sweet survey monkey kind of system where you get in there and you ask some specific questions about that. If you feel like your feedback on that might be too broad, or you don't want to open that door, grab basically a focus group, people who've been invested, they're mature, they've kind of put their money where their mouth is. They're not going to just show up with an opinion and tell you 6 ways to do it, and they don't give, and they're not helping out and all that kind of stuff. But people who've really shown up and said, I care about this community, I'm invested, grab them, take them to dinner, get them on the phone, hear from them, kind of boots on the ground. If you're sort of, kind of upper level management, for lack of a better word, at a church, ask the receptionist what's going on. Let someone from your team fill you in on some of the concerns. But in terms of rebuilding, we always have to know, where are we? I've got to get a clear sense of what's happening today before I come up with my next step plans and come up with where we're going to head next. So if we can go to the next slide. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but even with your own team, this is a really important time to revisit what's our purpose and what's our vision. The reason being is, in this last year and a half, I think most of us felt challenged in ways we've never felt challenged before. We might have not shown up to the challenge in ways we would have thought we would have. We might have thought, man, if I ever face something like that, I know exactly how I'm going to handle it. And it came and we didn't handle it very well, or we got really disoriented or really lost. This is a really good time to step back after what we've been through and said, you know what? I walked into that with my faith in this tact, in this mode. I walked into this believing some things, coming out of it. This is my new understanding. This is what I know about myself, or this is what I know about the world now that we've been through this. And I need to take that information and figure out how to integrate that into the world going forward. I just remember, if it's okay to share a personal story, I just remember in my 30s, I was a runner. I was very athletic, blah, blah, blah. Ended up with an injury, had to have a surgery. The whole thing went disaster. I mean, just went from bad to worse. 2 years I was in rehab. The thing couldn't have gone worse. If you had asked me before that experience how I would handle it, I would have overestimated myself tremendously. I would have thought I would have handled it so much better than I did. The number of things that came crashing down for me after that experience, I was in chronic pain. I didn't know what my future was going to look like health-wise. And I met a part of myself I had not met before. I was disappointed in me. I was disappointed in God. I was disappointed in my community. And it was a really, really tough time. Coming out of it, like all of us, you can blow by it and hope to forget it. You can become bitter and become angry about the brokenness of the world, or you can integrate it into wisdom and insight. My view of people who are chronically ill or in chronic pain had changed tremendously. I have recovered, but knowing that some people don't, changed my view of myself and the world. It was incredibly humbling. It's those moments that things crash and burn are sometimes the moments where we really have an opportunity to grow in wisdom and insight. So this is an opportunity to step back and go, this is how we viewed ourselves. This is who we thought we would have been in a moment like this. This is where we weren't who we thought we were going to be. This is where it was harder than we expected. And what do I want to take away from that experience? How do I want to grow through that experience? So this is a great time, now that you've had this crazy experience, to go back to your original purpose, your original vision, and really assess it and see what lines up with it. Next, we want to, when we assess the situation, if we go to the next slide, we want to ask the question, how effective are we in fulfilling our purpose? What is this season today? And are we effectively fulfilling our purpose in this particular season? Are we meeting the needs of this particular moment? It's a great time to ask that question. It's a great time to review your data. Who stuck around? Who left? Who's giving? Who's not giving? And try to get some insight, going back to maybe a focus group, a survey. Get some insight. What caused someone to stick around? Why did they stick through the whole thing? What's being offered here that makes this worth it to them? Why did some people leave? And that's going to be harder information to get. You may be able to track down those who've left, or you may have to get it from their friends and neighbors who still attend the church. What happened that people weren't here? And how do we humbly assess our part of that? They have their part. We're not responsible for the decisions that everybody else made, whether or not they wanted to stay engaged in spiritual community or not. However, it's always important to go, did I have a part? And if I did, what was it? And how can I learn from that? How can I move forward? And again, with data, we always want to look not just at quality, but not just at quantity, but at quality. What's the quality of sort of our product? And I hate to use that word, but if our job here is to create a spiritual community of people who are transformed and reflect a certain amount of, characteristics, they show up in the world a certain way. Did we see that happen in the last year and a half? Is there something that we need to do to ensure that that happens more fully or more completely going forward? And so getting your team together, whether it's your department, whether it's your whole church, and going, hey, what are we about? How effective are we in seeing that happen? Is there something unique in this season? Is there something unique in this moment that we should really be paying attention to? And what's the quality of what's happening? It's just a really ripe time to rebuild the foundation, a really ripe time to do a really good assessment, because the season's going to pass. Eventually we will get back to some sort of routine. Whether we consider it normal or not is another issue, but we'll get back to a routine. And this is a time where we're disoriented. We're not in our routines. Things probably haven't landed perfectly yet. This is a time to really take a look at that. So when it comes to getting clarity, if we go to the next slide, assessment and communication tools become really, really important. And so I mentioned it earlier, but really sitting down and considering maybe off schedule. I don't know when you do your ministry goals. I don't know when you do your plans for the year. Normally, you tend to do them at the beginning of the fiscal year, beginning of January, but as you're heading into maybe January, if you haven't gotten in the routine of doing ministry goals, if you haven't gotten in the routine of setting up, this is our vision for the year, I would highly recommend it. It's just going to move you forward in a lot of ways in terms of rebuilding. And your assessment tools, a good ministry planning tool, a good review process of looking at what have we done, have we accomplished our goals, good meetings, all of those kinds of things are going to be really, really helpful. And we'll be talking about some of those in the future. But your communication tools with your staff and with your congregation, and opening up those lines for feedback, opening up those lines of communication so that if you're running something, you're hearing from people, is a really important thing. A couple of things you might look for, if we go to the next slide, is creating clarity around their needs. And so a number of things that people come to spiritual community for, a number of things that people are looking for, and a number of things that might be out of sorts right now. One would be just their engagement needs for some sort of social connection. Depending on how locked down your community was, depending on how disconnected people were, social needs in terms of people expressing a need to meet people, They just need to have some good conversations. They might need to have some fun. They might need to be in an environment where they can build some good memories together. That's one of the unique things that a spiritual community does, is in light of living out spiritual values, in light of understanding, their spiritual kind of roots, they do it together. So this is a really important season to find out, what's the social condition of our people? How are they doing? And what are they needing at this moment? And what they ask for might surprise you. And so without trying to go in with too many assumptions, trying to draw it out of them, after the last year and a half, what kind of environments would fill your tank again? Community, what kind of environments would be interesting and engaging to you? Because being together is so important. And again, it's such a unique value and mission of a spiritual community or a church community. We really saw it in the last year and a half, the devastating effects of isolation. We're still trying to catch up on the data of the suicide rates. That has been incredibly difficult to get. But I can tell you, everybody in the counseling and therapeutic world knows this last year and a half was horrendous for suicides, addiction relapse, depression, anxiety. There's still a lot of that lingering. And a big part of that was social isolation. And people can't, once they become isolated and once they feel down, they can be very tempted to stay in that mode. They can resist showing up to social environments because they don't have anything that fun to share, or they don't feel like they're showing up in great condition and they don't want to bring that. You as a spiritual community and as a church have such a unique opportunity and a unique role to create environments to draw those people back out who have gone home, hidden, put on weight, been alone and isolated, feel like garbage. I mean, I'm describing some of us as well, right? I know I've upgraded my wardrobe to a next size. Some of you have too, I'm sure. But I'm trying to downgrade that. But all that to say, you just have a role. Your role has a huge social component. Find out what people need, assess that, figure out how to meet those needs, because honestly, you're going to have a huge impact on people's emotional and spiritual health. I don't want to sound too dramatic. You may be part of helping someone prevent ending their life just by having, honestly, a potluck and reminding them, oh my goodness, there's a world out here. There are people to socialize with. There's hope. I've got a little energy going again. I got the serotonin, upped again. I'm engaged again. So don't underestimate that you can help create an important environment. Educational needs. Some people are just like, I just need to learn something. I feel like my brain is turned into mush. I have been scrolling Instagram for a year and a half. I have not thought about anything important or significant. I have not gone to a deep place at all. And I need to be engaged. I need someone to help me get that engaged again. So you may be a huge part of that. Some people just need to feel like they have a purpose and productivity. Just give me something to do besides sit around and think about what just happened. Give me an outlet. Give me some kind of challenge. Let me use my gifts. I've been gifted. Let me use that somewhere. Let me use these talents for somebody or something else. They're feeling bored and disconnected, and giving them an outlet can be incredibly helpful. And obviously, spiritual needs. People may need to have conversations, prayer time, a worship time where they reconnect spiritually. Being home alone, being home on Zoom, watching watching videos and listening to podcasts hasn't been enough. So getting them together and engaged spiritually as a community can be really, really significant and important right now. The next thing in terms of creating clarity and rebuilding is getting clarity around their care needs. So going to this community that's really hurting and really struggling, we're going to actually get into this next week in terms of developing a big resource list so that your church doesn't become buried in trying to meet care needs, but really begins to expand its network in the community and its resource list so that you become a hub and people know, hey, listen, I check your website, or I call up your pastoral care team, or I talk to your receptionist, and I know that you vetted a group of people or vetted a group of resources in this community that might help me meet some of my needs. So I'm coming to you to have some of that, assistance, but I'm not expecting you to meet it all. We're going to talk next week about how to set that up so that you have kind of a value added service to your congregation or even to the broader community without adding a humongous amount of weight to your team and to your staff. So that's next week. But some of the things looking at care needs, again, will be the emotional needs that some people have, especially after this last year and a half. The mental health crisis is real, and people struggling with mental health issues will want some sort of connection in your community, may come to you with a lot of needs. And we're going to talk a bit about how you help resource them, knowing that most of you don't have therapeutic backgrounds, that's not your thing. But that these are people in your congregation or community that need help, will look to you for wisdom and guidance. And we're going to try to bump up your resource list around that. They may have financial needs. It's just been tough. I think a lot of people stayed above water, but I think as payouts are changing and housing issues have risen, and it's just tough. If you're in California, I know some of you are in Nevada, but California, it's been very, very tough. I think we're going to see some financial needs rolling in. We're going to talk about how to help with that. You're going to see people with medical and health needs. We've still got insurance issues and care around that. We'll talk about how to resource them, and then just deeper spiritual needs. So knowing that in rebuilding, some of it will involve pulling some people who went below the waterline back up, getting their head back up above water, and knowing that a whole host of people can land on your church or your spiritual community asking for help and swamp the boat. We're going to try to find ways to keep you above water and make sure that we're getting your congregation back in good shape. So those are some things in terms of rebuilding. In terms of connecting, you've got to, on the next slide, we're going to talk about morale builders. In terms of kind of your core congregation, they've stuck around, or people who are coming back to church or back to temple, they're trying to re-engage, they want to be involved again. You want to keep in mind just things that are generally tend to be good morale builders, and get people engaged and invested. One is trust. Trust has been so damaged in the last year and a half. I think our media did, it doesn't matter who you were watching or what you were following, media did a tremendous amount of damage to people's sense of trust that the information they're getting, the people that they're hearing from, are accurate, are not giving you a very edited view of the story that's leading you to be upset and frustrated. And then you find out there's a whole back end that nobody told you about after you got irritated or scared. And so people are really disoriented when it comes to trust, and building trust in your community is going to be very attractive, is going to be very important to people balancing out, leveling out their emotions, leveling out their sense of well-being. So finding ways to build confidence that who you are is who you say you are, that what you're offering is kind of loaded with integrity, that the message that you're giving is a message founded on truth. All of those things are going to be really, really important to pulling people back into your congregation, and honestly creating a contrast or a foil to what's happening out in the rest of the world where it isn't trustworthy. So there's a big leverage moment there to really highlight trustworthy and trust building activities. People will also feel like their morale is boosted when they feel like they have a purpose. I think people, again, I know I've said this, but they're just disoriented and lost. So really reminding people, what is the purpose for why we're here? And then how do we really fulfill that purpose in a meaningful way, and giving them very specific ways to engage in that. So going to investment, people are attached to things they invest in. They really, really are. Even when you look at some of the psychological studies and surveys, if I care for someone, and I do a great job of caring for them, I am more attached to them than they are to me. to be really honest. That's what all the surveys show. It's the I've poured into you. I'm invested. This place matters to me. This event or whatever it is something that I put my heart in. That is how people feel like their presence matters. It matters that I showed up. It matters that I'm here. So weirdly, well, we need to acknowledge that there is a care group of people who need a lot of help just to get above the waterline. For those who are above the waterline, they need something to do. They need a place to invest. They don't even want to be indulged at this point. Let me do something important. So you're going to want to find ways to let people invest, get involved. And I know I've recruited volunteer things before. I know probably some of you are wanting to jump through the screen right now and choke me because you think I'm trying to recruit. But what you may have to do is, going back to assessment, is find out what is it they want to get involved in. Where is it that they want to put their skills and their efforts? Maybe what we're asking them to get involved in isn't the right fit for them. Is there something else we could open up, a new opportunity we could create, a way that we could resource them to go run with something, assuming they're mature, they're willing to, kind of connect with you, not take off and do their own crazy thing inside your church, but have a good partnership with you to actually run with something and take something over. There are people ready to do that. So getting a sense of purpose and investment will help build morale, and then reward. People like to invest in something and feel like they've reaped something. If I've spent all summer planting a garden, I want to see some vegetables, right? And so finding ways to even reward their investment, let them see the fruits of their labor, share the great stories of things, be great storytellers, right? Tell the stories of the wins, of the recoveries, of the healings, and let people rejoice in that. Let them enjoy that some things worked out, some things have gone very well, and they were part of making that happen. If you spent the last year and a half giving a lot away, investing in homeless ministry or food banks or whatever, tell the stories. Let everybody know who was tithing. Let everybody know who shows up. This is what happened because you invested. Let them see that reward, build their morale. And so finally, as we're wrapping up, developing a plan. I think can we go to the next slide? Yeah, next one. Sorry, developing a plan. Actually, go to the last slide. Thanks, Julie. I appreciate that. A couple things you want to go back to assessment is, for those in your congregation who are discouraged, they need hope. So we've got to find ways to give them hope. Got to find ways to re-engage them, that life is worth living. There are reasons to be here. There are wonderful things happening. So we got to be the cheerleaders, the storytellers, the ones that say, there's keep going, don't give up. If people are bored, they've been sitting home, they're going to need a challenge. If people are lonely, they're going to need community. So just summing up what we've been talking about, get an assessment, find out where your congregation is, and figure out what's our next. Does this group need hope? If you're in LA, you need hope. If you're somewhere else where it's kind of hasn't been as big a deal and dramatic, they just might need bored and need a challenge and something to do. So try to figure out what's going on with your community. And then Julie, can we go to the previous slide, number 10? And then we'll wrap up. What you also want to do is make sure, as you're looking at your communications plan, as you're looking at how you interact with your congregation, this is an important time to assess basically your comms department or your comms process. Your congregation and your community needs extremely easy access to information about how to get involved immediately. So this is the time to really streamline things. What you don't want to do is send them, come in and go, hey, if you want information, go check our website another time. You want to do it right in the moment. People need to get re-engaged. People need to get involved quickly. So I've seen this at a few churches. It's awesome. They're putting QR codes at the back of each seat so that someone can stick their phone up there and immediately pull up your communications page. Something like that, or immediately give them something that they can text into or something that they can look at immediately. So if you're providing opportunities for them to understand, this is the vision and mission of who we are, these are the events that are coming up, these are the groups that we're engaged in, you're going to want to, very few barriers. Get them involved immediately. People are hurting. their energy is low, their everything's feeling like a chore, they're just struggling. So one of the best gifts you can give them is a very quick access point to very easy entries back in, easy wins, felt needs being met, so that they remind themselves we have to come together spiritually. We've got to be in proximity with each other. We've got to be in the same room with each other. We've got to re-engage so that you can get that energy and that life back in the room. So as easy for them as we can make it will be the most helpful. So all that to say, going back to the beginning, if you heard all this and you're like, I'm exhausted, I can't do this, or we've tried it and it's not working, you may need a break just for yourself. Take that time. You being in good condition is you getting right your oxygen mask on before you help the child sitting next to you. If you need the oxygen mask, go get that first. But if you're in pretty good shape and you're trying to rebuild your community, assess, develop a plan, go back and revisit your purposes. Let this last year inform us and be even better, more insightful about people, more insightful about transformation and spiritual development, and allowing this to unfold in a way that makes us stronger going forward, more wise, healthier, more mature. And this is just, don't let what just happened tank you. There is a huge future ahead of you, and there's a absolutely enormous need for what you do. So whether it's now or after the first of the year, it's going to be really, really important. Recollect ourselves, recollect our communities, and really move forward together. So with all that, Julie, Q&A, if we want to do that, do you want to kind of host that part right there in terms of Q&A? What's helpful right now?
All right, thanks, Kathleen. We didn't see any specific questions come through the Q&A, but what you can do is if you have a specific question for Kathleen that you think of later, feel free to email it directly to me at julie@ccia.com. I know we do get some questions that come in after the fact, so Kathleen, I can send those to you if you would maybe want to answer those offline.
Great.
Yeah, we could totally do that. But it looks like we might be ending a little bit earlier today, but I'm sure I can speak for everybody by saying there are some really, really great takeaways. It looks like we have one question coming in. Do you have a resource for questions to use on a survey?
I will make sure that we send that through. Yes, I do. I actually have a couple different things that I can send to you. And a couple comments. When you do a specific team ministry survey, it's really helpful to be really specific. But when you're doing a broad church survey, sometimes the best thing you can do is go, yeah, hey, how have your needs been met this last year? What needs do you wish could be met? So when you do broad church survey, open-ended, let's just have you share with us without me leading you too much. Tell me what's coming out of you naturally. So open-ended, broad-based questions for the broad whole church. Your specific ministry, if you're the youth minister or you're running groups or whatever, the more specific you can get, the better, because your ministry is already kind of clear, and you may need to know kind of the ticky-tacky details of what they're saying, like, hey, it just, I need more communication from you, or your emails are too long, or whatever else it could be that they can tell us that we're like, okay, I can tweak that. So I would say, as a general principle, draw out your congregation with a big all church survey, get really specific with your specific ministries. But I'll send over some resources.
Okay, great. All right. So thank you everybody for joining us for part one. Be sure to tune in for part two next week, same time, same place. It'll be Wednesday, November 10th at 10 a.m. Be sure to register and tune in. And if this resonated with you or you'd like to share it with somebody you know, share it with your community, please share the registration link if you think this can benefit somebody else. But we really appreciate your patience today and your participation. So we hope to see you all next week. Thanks so much, Kathleen, for your time. And we will see you everybody next week.
Thanks so much.
Take care.